Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to an episode called Head to Head, where we are going to be going through and comparing and talking about the Hellacopters versus the Night Flight Orchestra. Both bands are Swedish, both bands have members from other groups, and both bands are throwback to the sound of the 70s and 80s. So all in all, I'll be reviewing, comparing, contrasting, talking about whether both of these or either of these even met my expectations. So join me for this head-to-head. We're talking about the Hellacopters and the Night Flight Orchestra. If you are new to my channel though, and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also, don't forget to comment and like as well. Don't forget to turn on notifications because then you're gonna get to stay up to date on really cool episodes where we're going head to head with two different Swedish bands, the Hellacopters and the Night Flight Orchestra. So let's dive into this thing here. Definitely want to give you guys a little bit of background on each of the bands, and then we're going to dive right into this whole thing and kind of see where it takes us today. But we'll start with the Hellacopters, and they formed in 1994, part of the garage rock revival movement. And it was initially just considered to be a side project for two of the main guys, Nicky Anderson on guitar and vocals. I'll talk a little bit more about him in a minute, and Dragan on guitar. And so the band initially existed from 1994 up until 2008, where they decided to take a break from each other and or break up, but reunited in 2016, and they're going present. So they have had two distinct eras of the band itself, and now celebrating their 30th anniversary. And I'm quite sure that when they started this thing out in 1994, they didn't expect that. And as far as Night Flight Orchestra, who we're going to be talking about, so they formed in 2007, and they're started as a side project as well. But this one is so that the band members that come into this can actually explore their love of AOR melodic rock from the 70s and 80s. And then they have actually added some elements of disco and funk and other things to it, which I think has made it a really interesting sound. And now they've been going 17 years as well. So again, two killer Swedish rock bands that are throwback artists doing some of the stuff that we here on this channel love so much, that 70s and 80s rock sound. We've got some of that to go into here. So I'm going to start off with the artist that I actually had the highest expectations for, and it was the brand new Hellacopters called Overdriver. So killer hard rock band, the Hellacopters. There's no doubt about that. And this one here, I had been waiting for since I got into them on the reunion album, Eyes of Oblivion. So I've been a fan of this band for a little while now. I got into them when they did the reunion here. Maybe got into them around 2023, I think, because I think this album had already been out for a little bit. It's a 2022 release. And since that time, I picked up the last album that they actually recorded, this one, but it was a covers album, although I think it's absolutely fantastic. And usually I wouldn't say that about a covers album, although I will touch on killer cover songs that this band has recorded that they really make it their own. By the Grace of God, this one here, I think this is actually maybe even a reissue. And then I picked up the recent reissue, I think it's called Grande Rock or something along those lines. So an album that goes back a ways where they just recently did a remix of it. And so I'd been getting into this band for a while, and my hype had been growing on this. And so the fact that they had finally announced a brand new album, I was super excited about. Now, in the meantime, though, they released a single called Stay With Me, and this came out in May 23rd of 2024. So a solid 6+ months back or so, 7 months even. And the song, Stay With Me, which is an original song, is really good, just straight ahead, blistering hard rock song. And they paired it, giving it a B-side, which you don't see often when bands drop singles these days, at least digitally, with a cover of the Cure song, Fire in Cairo. And that's what I was talking about, where it's like, this song was so freaking good and sounded so great. I just thought it was an original song of theirs until I looked into it a little bit more and found out that it was a cover song. But they seem to be able to take other people's music and really turn it into something of their own. And I think that's just a sign of a really good band when they can interpret something, making it sound like Hellacopters, even though it comes from somebody else. So I was really excited with that. And it turns out that that A side, Stay With Me, or Stay With You, was supposed to be on the new album. Thing is, it's not. Neither of those songs appear on here. So when I finally did get down to listening to the couple songs that they had dropped as singles, which the third track on here, I don't want to be just a memory. And then I think it's the ninth song on here, Do You Feel Normal? And I listened to both of those and neither of them did it for me. So this album here is definitely more of the throwback to the garage rock sound, but almost the Beatlesque sounds of like Cheap Trick. And not that they didn't have that on other releases, but this here was definitely not as hard rocking and power driving and blistering, at least as that song Stay With You, and or what I had heard on this album, which is what made me a fan of the band. So my initial gut reaction to this was just huge letdown. I wasn't interested in. I got 5 tracks into it and I had already switched over to Night Flight Orchestra. So I'm going to come back. I'm going to talk, I'm sure, more about Hellacopters, but because of that and the way that I was listening to this, I want to talk to you about this one now, which is this one I did have high expectations for as well, because I had already checked out the 3 singles that had come off of this. So Shooting Velvet, which was just immediately caught my ear, pulled me in, made me super excited for this. And then the title track, Give Us the Moon, had already been released. And that one too, great track on here. And then track number 12, Way to Spend the Night, was also on here. Not as great as those first 2, but listening to all 3 of those in my anticipation of this new album coming out really made this one have high expectations. Higher than, well, I won't say higher than what I was expecting for this, but almost as high as my expectations for this, meaning now these 2 were going head to head. So on Friday, when they dropped, these were the 2 things that were certainly the most exciting for me. And this one here, in the end of the day, when I switched over from this one, ended up taking the cake. It just caught my ear. It pulled me in. The opening track on here is just an intro. So the second song, Stratus, literally like it sounds, takes off. You're running. It moves into Shooting Velvet, which was a single, which I already knew on here. And it just kept going all the way through. This thing doesn't let up. All the way through, it sounded as good as those singles that had come off of it. And so that in and of itself initially made me like this a lot more and gave me that impression that maybe this was just not doing it for me, sort of a thing, because I couldn't get into this one on first listening. You know how there's albums, sometimes they grab you, they pull you in, and from the very first listen, it's great. And then there's those other albums that take a few. And so I've been going back and I've been listening to both of these a lot more. And I went back and checked this out here. I've probably given this a solid 4 or 5 listens all the way through and partial listens in addition to that. But this one here has actually started to really grow on me. I hear it, like I said, as more of throwback, Beatlesque sounding, sort of pop rock in the vein that Hellacopters does. There's definitely more catchy melody and things of that nature on here, which is interesting because it's not at all what Nicky Alexander does sort of in his day job or the other bands. I mean, I think Hellacopters is now his day job, but you know, he came from being a drummer in a death metal band Entombed. He also is drummer in the doom metal band Lucifer, for which I actually think he's married to the front woman there. He has a soul band called Solution, and he has another rock band called Imperial State Electric. So he has all these different other projects that are out there. And, you know, whether it's doom metal, death metal, rock, soul, he kind of does it all. And I think in and of that sort of stuff, it's what parts of that can he pull and bring into Helicopters over here, at least for me, for my ears. The band also features guitar player Dragon, and he's from Backyard Babies. So if you know that band, you know what they sound like. They're a little bit more of sort of 80s punk rock sound style throwback stuff, and they're a band out of the 90s as well. And he brings a lot of that sound over into this. And I definitely heard a lot of it here and would have expected more of that on this, but it doesn't really kick in. It doesn't kick in until the fourth track, Wrong Face On. That's where I finally start to hear stuff like the song Stay With You. The stuff that I was expecting to hear, that doesn't happen until about the fourth song in. The fifth one, Soldier On, is also really good on here. The seventh song, Faraway Looks, that one is probably my favorite one on the album, the most rockin' song that really gets my blood just pumping on this thing and moving. And once I started to hear some of that, I started to enjoy this album a lot more. This is definitely an album where the second half of the album gets better. And it might be in contrast to Night Flight Orchestra that I think starts off really strong. And not that it doesn't hold up all the way through, but the second half of this doesn't hold up quite as much as the first half. So, depending upon how you like to listen to things, sometimes it's great to have albums that build and end on the high note, and other ones that pull you right in, but maybe they don't hold your interest all the way through. And who knows where this will go in multiple more listens with things. But this one here started to pick up, but I think I had to let go of my expectations from where the band was and what I had been listening to just checking out this release. And sometimes it's very hard to do with a band. Whereas Night Flight Orchestra and this new album, Give Us the Moon, which is their seventh album, I don't have the first two. I actually have, starting with the third album, Amber Galactic, Sometimes the World Ain't Enough. I've got Aromantic, which I think is 2020 and 2021's Aromantic 2. And this is an album that didn't click with me at all at the time, but once I started listening to singles off of this, I pulled this one out and suddenly this worked for me. So headspace is definitely a key thing. But this band here, like the Hellacopters, where we got Nikki Alexander coming from a death metal band, we have several of the guys here coming from melodic death metal. So the fact that we have two killer throwback bands where guys are coming from death metal groups is sort of a mind-blowing thing for me, at least. And it was very hard for me to initially get in or have any interest in these bands because the guys came from music that I didn't normally enjoy. And again, once I could let all that go, I've really been able to get in and enjoy this. So Night Flight Orchestra has two guys from a band called Soilwork. Bjorn Stred and David Anderson are in the band. And then also one guy from Arch Enemy, Charlie D'Angelo, who's the bass player. And then it's got two or three other guys as well. There's quite a few guys in Night Flight Orchestra. Really good stuff though, but the fact that we have these two melodic death metal bands coming together, or guys from them coming together to create this killer 70s, 80s melodic rock throwback that has elements of dance music, disco, funk, that sort of stuff thrown into it, really is a surprising thing. But if you guys have watched my channel, you know that I like rock albums and things that sometimes lean towards the disco and funk, which isn't a common thing, but Rolling Stones do it upright, and some other groups have done that as well. And it's a cool thing that isn't very common. And when you get that, sometimes that perks up my ears. And so both of these bands have elements like that that really kind of perk up my ears, make me take notice. And in the end of the day, which one of these is it that really sort of sold it for me? Which one, hands down, takes the cake? And initially, I think I would have said Night Flight Orchestra. But with multiple listens now, I've actually come back to the Hellacopters. So by the time that I'm filming this, when I was preparing for this, doing so many listens to this, and initially thinking that I was not into this one, and I was going to be presenting to you this one made the comeback. It started to rise up. Like I said, I think my expectations came down and I started to just enjoy it for what it was. And this album here, in the end of the day, while it doesn't kick off the way that I would have expected it, and it didn't include the songs that I thought that I wanted it to have, at least even as bonus tracks on here. So I had a big letdown up front. This one is slowly making a comeback in here, but I don't want to take away from this one at all because this one sold me right away. So I was very happy with this and have remained happy, but I will say that it hasn't necessarily grown or moved from that point. So again, in the head-to-head, I think the winner is Hellacopters because this one came from behind and is pulling forward in the race, and it may continue to do that in the long run. So there you go, two Swedish rock bands with members from other groups that are doing killer throwback stuff. And today we have the winner of the Hellacopters. All right, guys, so if you did check out these two bands and their releases that just came out on January 31st of 2025, who did you end up winning or going with or selecting in the end of the day? Who is your winner? Which band do you like more? However it is that you want to make the assessment on it. But that was at least my comparison, contrast, and discussion on trying to figure out when or if they would even meet my expectations. And in the end of the day, I think they do meet my expectations. One does it a little higher, but the other one is pulling from behind. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.